All right. Well, thank you guys for joining us. We're going to give it just a few minutes since we're going to still be letting people in who are popping into the training. But as you guys see, this is kind of just a standard Zoom meeting. We did this over kind of a presentation style because we want you guys to feel comfortable to be able to unmute yourselves, turn your cameras on and ask questions, submit questions via the chat, however you're comfortable engaging in this training. So we do encourage questions. I know this is remote, so sometimes it's a little bit harder to engage in the information. But we're really here with the goal of being able to get you guys more comfortable with changes that DHS has made with technology, and then also comfortable with technology in general and how to have conversations, what types of technology are out there. So we're gonna have different presenters. We've got a panelist of presenters. Like I said, I'm going to probably give it like 2 more minutes here just to make sure that we get everybody who wants to join in before we start doing presentations. But like I said, if some of you guys didn't hear me, we'll have our presenters spotlighted. But if you as the audience do have questions, feel free to submit them at any point via chat. Feel free to unmute yourselves. You can turn your cameras on if you want to, but you absolutely don't have to feel pressured to do that either. But you can unmute yourselves and ask questions directly too. So don't shy away from engaging. I also like to say, don't shy away from pushing back on us. If there's anything that you're hearing that you disagree with, that's the idea with these trainings is we really want you guys to be able to say, hey, that's not how I understood it. Here's how I understood it. So that we can offer clarification, or maybe there's information that we need to bring back to DHS. That's why we have DHS on the call, is to help us learn and do better and make changes so things are easier to access like their goals are. So I am just letting a few more people in, just a couple of people trickling in. I'll give some background real quick to what this training is and why this was put together and kind of the idea behind it. Thank you guys for joining. I mean, I think it's really fantastic that you're taking the time today to learn about this. The training doesn't end here. So if you guys have questions, I'm going to provide my contact information, but you'll hear us probably repeat this multiple times throughout the presentation today. We all work very closely together. Unfortunately, to a certain extent, the assistive technology and remote support community in Minnesota is relatively small. So we always say, if you want to get a hold of one of us, you can reach out to anybody and they'll be able to put you in contact with the appropriate person. So I'll share my contact information so you at least have one person's contact information and one point person, and I can always get you in contact with anybody on this call or anybody outside of this call that might be able to provide services as well. So I am with ARRM. My name is Elena Gallagher, and we are doing this through something called the Innovations Grant. So what that is we partnered with DHS because DHS really saw a need to start using technology more to help provide supports. And in seeing that need, which was really fantastic, they weren't seeing as much utilization after, like, policy was maybe rewritten or changed so that it was more open to allowing technology to be approved. So it really kind of brought to light that there was kind of a need to do more training with you as case managers, with assessors, with providers, with individuals and their families. So the idea with this grant that I'm working with is to provide training to all those different groups so that everybody's comfortable with the idea of using technology. We can all kind of come together. That way, like in your guys' roles, you don't feel like you're ever like butting heads with somebody when you're like, oh, this would be really great, or, oh, I'm not as comfortable with this, I need to understand it better. You kind of, hopefully, eventually it'll be everybody's more comfortable with these conversations and everybody kind of knows that we're all working on the same team towards this. So that's the goal of the grant. Like I said, we're partnered with DHS, so we're working very closely with them. Anna McIntyre is here on the call with us today from DHS. I'll let all of my presenters introduce themselves. But the idea is that we're here to share information. And like I said earlier, we're here to gather information too. So if there's stuff that we hear in this training or questions that you have that might result in some further conversations, that's kind of the idea of this as well. If there are changes that need to be made, we want to know it so that we can make those changes. So that's a very, very quick summary and background of why we're doing this training, why I'm so excited that you guys are here, and hope that you'll be able to pull a lot out of it. So to reiterate for the third time, we really encourage you to ask questions either via chat, or you can unmute yourselves and ask questions live. Don't have to wait for the end. We'll pause and ask for questions, but I always encourage people, like, if you have a question right then and there, please feel free to just ask it. We don't want it to be something that you lose because we kept talking about a different topic or changed course or something like that. So please feel free to share your questions as you have them. All right, so now I'm going to get into the portion where we'll let our presenters introduce themselves, some background of where all of our presenters come from and how we all came together to do this training. We are all part of a group called Minnesota NEAT, which stands for Minnesota Networking in Education and Assistive Technology, and or part of an ARRM technology work group. And the idea between those groups was just, like I said, in Minnesota, the assistive technology and remote support space is fairly small.
This is Lynn from Parle, returning your call. Hi, thank you.
Oh, hey, we do have, if everybody could mute themselves, that would be great. I think
I was calling in regards to
somebody
Rebecca,
might not be muted, right?
Okay. She said that she is in need of additional incontinence products.
Also,
You can mute them.
yep,
Sonia.
I'm trying to go through the lists to mute everybody. So, all right, sorry about that. I think I've got you covered. And I apologize if I muted you and you were not excited for me to mute you. So back on track. So we're all part of a group called Minnesota NEAT and or the ARRM Technology Work Group. Both groups were created to get people to come together to talk about technology. And so that we can learn from each other, we can share ideas. If we can't do something, we know somebody to reach out to. So we're all very, very passionate about assistive technology and remote support, and really hope that that's conveyed today and you guys can kind of see that. So I'm going to kick it over to Anna McIntyre to introduce herself, since she will be our first presenter today. But then Anna, we'll just do it chain style where you can call out who's the next presenter and so on and so forth.
All right, sounds good, Elena. Hi, everyone. I'm Anna McIntyre, and I am with the Disability Services Division at DHS. Specifically, I'm on the waiver policy and compliance team, and I'm the policy lead for all of the technology related services, as well as the remote support provision of services that have been approved through CMS. And I am very glad that you guys are here today, and I'm happy to be here, and I hope you get a lot out of this. Matt.
Good afternoon. I'm Matt Hansen. I am an assistive technology professional and an environmental accessibility specialist. I also own Mercaric Assistive Technology. We work statewide with all manner of assistive technology, including remote monitoring, home automation, adaptive equipment, switch access, quite a bit of ordering and pass-through, tracking devices, and personal emergency response units. I missed a bunch, but I think I hit the top ones. So I'm going to throw it over to Kathy.
Hi, my name is Kathy Larson. I am the Director of Remote Supports and Assistive Technology with REM. I work across the state with REM, HSI, and also TBI Residential. And I help support their development of homes using technology for overnight supervision and or assistive technology in the homes. And I'm going to pass it to Anna Hegland.
Hi, everyone. I am Anna Hegland. I'm a senior director with Dungarvan, Minnesota, and we have been providing remote support primarily in traditional residential settings since it's been allowed, so for about 14 years. And I will pass it to Sue.
So for now, we'll hand it over, or maybe, Sue, if you can hear us, you are muted and your video is off, but I couldn't find you in the list. So for now, I'm going to hand it over to Kit Piltingsrud then.
Sue's back on.
Oh, perfect. You can go still, Kit.
Oh, okay. Hi, I'm Kit Piltingsrud. I'm a assistive technology professional and training specialist with Mount Olivet Rolling Acres, or MORA. I have worked in the field of disability since 1994 when I started as a DSP. I then got my teaching license and worked as a special education teacher for the developmentally disabled in the high school transition age, and then went and managed some group homes and stuff for a while. So that's me. Sue, you're up.
All right, sorry about that. I went to get my technology. Hi, I'm Sue Redepenning, and I'm the owner of Live Life Therapy Solutions. And we do assistive technology throughout the state of Minnesota for waiver billable services. And then we do have several grants that I'm going to talk about today. We've been working in AT for 10 years. And I don't know who went already. Sorry.
Kathy.
Oh yeah, Kathy, you did introduce yourself,
Yes,
right? Yeah, okay.
Yep, I did.
Okay, perfect. I think that's all of our presenters. So we're gonna, like I said, start with questions and more presentation and then questions from you for DHS. So Anna, if you want to take it away.
Yeah, sounds good. And while Elena's bringing up my slides, I just want to share that just how important it is, the engagement piece of this, because we were presenting, our last presentation was in Anoka, and it was interesting because a few years prior to that, they were our first presentation, like our pilot group. And it was during that training that I found that someone had the courage to raise their hand and say, well, what's the point of trying to authorize this technology when this T2029 code is such a barrier and people can't get it for a year, and all this stuff. And I was like, whoa, wait, what what is this? I know nothing about. And so now there's changes that are happening to that code as a result of that. And then my following up more with the Minnesota NEAT members, got to understand better some of the barriers that were surrounding authorizing technology. And so we've been working really hard to try to break down some of those barriers. Another thing that we've heard is that from some lead agencies where they've said, we've had staff that have attended these trainings in the past, and they hear you at DHS saying these different things, like it's okay to fund this and you don't need this and these different things, but then that it's not actually documented that way in the CBSM. And so in response to that, we have I think it's a 5 or 6 page supplemental guidance document that's coming out. I keep saying soon, I'm not sure when. It's just with the communications team going through accessibility and approvals and all of that. But that will have a lot of the information that I share verbally with you guys that isn't necessarily in the CBSM currently, that it's been requested that to actually have that in there would be very helpful. So that is coming. So that is coming soon. First, we'll start with just some authorization odds and ends. So one thing that we hear frequently is that lead agencies, and I speak generally of this, I do not know if your lead agencies are doing this or not. So if you are not, thank you. And if you are, just please know that 2 bids are only required for EAA home mods or vehicle modifications that exceed the $40,000 cap. Now there may be times where as a case manager, you are being expected to approve a project, and it's something that you've not had experience with before. And so you really just have no way of gauging whether or not that is a good bid or a bad bid or what have you. In that case, getting a second bid is totally fine to do. That's totally fine. But I would though request that you as case managers would be the ones to coordinate getting that second bid for the work being done. And I say this just because we do have a much smaller number of providers than what is listed in, if you went into like Minnesota Help Info, for example. And so Elena is going to be sharing with you all at the end of this training a list of providers who are truly actively providing services to waiver recipients in Minnesota. And it's a much smaller list. And so if families are trying, who are already oftentimes overwhelmed, are trying to call to try to get an assessment done for their work project. I mean, they may have to call 50 people before they get someone that actually works with the waiver. And for somebody who doesn't probably entirely understand what they're requesting, that can be very challenging. So if you really feel like a second bid is needed, please handle that yourselves. In the meantime, too, if it's for assistive technology, you really don't need two bids. And the reason being is that it's not required, first of all. Second of all, we have a very small number of providers who can do assistive technology assessments. And we really want them spending their time focusing on doing assessments with people versus spending all of their resources trying to track down bids for assistive technology that's not even required. And it can be challenging because we all know there's a staffing shortage, and that does not just affect our field, that's affecting everybody. And so these providers who are being asked for bids, they don't have the resources to provide those bids as well. And so it might take 3-5 weeks longer to get this second bid. And they may know that like they're never selected for the work to be done anyway. So it just creates this like paper trail, resource intensive process that isn't always needed, especially for assistive technology. Assistive technology assessments are unique in and of that the assessors are trained to find the technology solution that's going to work the best for someone. And that gets into our second bullet here. The cost effective does not mean least expensive. So sometimes getting a second bid is really not providing you with that information that you're hoping it will. Because we changed the language from, it used to say least costly alternative, but then that was leading lead agencies to think that they would always have to go with the least expensive bid, no matter what. But what we want is that we want to have it be cost effective in relation to the productivity it provides. Like we want it to have, there's quality that goes into and comes into play. There's customer service that comes into play. The assessors have actually tried different products with the person to determine which one they're going to be able to operate the best. And one thing I always say is that the most expensive equipment out there is the equipment that's just sitting in a cupboard or a closet because it didn't really actually work for the person because it wasn't what was really recommended in their assessment. So feel free to trust those assessments. I know all of the assessors in the field, and because there's not a lot, and I can assure you that they're very well aware of the waiver plan requirements, and they're already working hard to try to find the least costly alternative that's going to be the best thing to meet that person's needs, taking in all those factors into account. So it's not an apples to apples comparison on price. And so just that's another reason why it's just doesn't make sense to get two bids. The next thing I want to focus on is that assistive technology is for everyone, regardless of where they live, whether they live independently in their family home, in a community residential service. It's for everyone. And if there's technology that can meet someone's needs, that can help them to be more independent versus relying on staff to do that for them or help with extensively, that can be huge for someone. And I do feel like it's gotten better more recently, but even up until a couple of years ago, I was still frequently hearing, well, someone in a CRS doesn't need, say, an Alexa for environmental controls to turn their lights on and off, or turn their TV on and off, or what have you, because they quote unquote have staff to do that for them. Well, as we know, they don't always have staff that can do that for them. And then also those staff may be busy assisting a housemate with going to bed or using the restroom, what have you. And then meanwhile, this other person has to wait like 20 minutes to have their lights turned off when they just really want to go to sleep. Inexpensive technology under $50 that can allow somebody that ability to control their environment on their own without having to rely on staff to do that. That's going to create greater independence. And in turn, it's going to decrease reliance on staff. Will that make the staff's job easier, not having to run and turn on and off someone's light or adjust their television? Yeah, probably will. But that means that technology is a success, because if it makes the staff's job easier, that means that it's working. That means that the person is more independent than they had been previously. And that's what we want for everyone, regardless of their living situation. There's also a legislative requirement to consider technology at the 45-day and annual meetings thereafter. And so that's another thing I like to point out, because this legislative requirement has been around since 2017. However, it rests in 245D provider requirements. And it's interesting because if you read that section of statute, there is direction, the documentation requirements, both required by the provider and the case manager. But because it's in 245D, lead agencies oftentimes don't know about it. So I like to bring that up for that reason, so that you are aware, for one, but also because as we've been continuing to train on that legislative requirement, more providers are bringing up technology solutions at team meetings, which is great. That's what we want them to do. But because lead agencies maybe aren't familiar with that requirement, what it looks like is that potentially that like the staff are just coming up with these ideas on their own to make their job easier, when in fact they've had conversations with the person beforehand, before the meeting, and they're making these requests on behalf of the person, not to make their job easier. But again, like I said, if it does, that's okay too. But the big thing is it's just to help people be more self-reliant and less staff dependent, because we don't have enough staff currently to meet the amount of need that is out there currently, and it's only projected to get worse. So we have to start thinking of different things. So I like to mention that so that lead agencies, their eyebrows don't raise when they think that providers are requesting technology versus requesting it on behalf of the people they're supporting. The other thing is that they are requesting it on behalf of someone that they're supporting. So if you don't feel it's the right fit or the right time, what have you, and you decide to deny the technology request, that's totally up to you. But if you do so, then please send out the notice of action forms so that the person and their family can appeal if they would so desire. Some people were thinking that they didn't need to send out the notice of action forms because they felt like the provider was requesting it versus the person, but just know that they're always requesting it on behalf of the person. Okay. Any questions on that before we move to the next slide? Because I know that is like a lot. And I can't see the chat or anything. So are we doing okay, everyone? All right, well then moving right along. Next slide, please. Oh, and we already discussed that, so I have a tendency to do that, so thank you. These are the services that either fund or support the use of technology. You will receive a copy of this PowerPoint presentation, and these are all live links. And I encourage you to, to kind of poke around and see how these different services are different from one another. The biggest thing that I want you to take away from this training is that between MA and the waiver, the vast majority of technology can be funded. So that's the important thing to know. The biggest or most challenging piece can sometimes be knowing which service to authorize that under. So here are the list of services. Just to give you like a really high level kind of cheat sheet way to think about it, is that assistive technology and specialized supplies, well, it's supposed to be specialized equipment and supplies, are essentially the same service in practice. But assistive technology services for people who are on DD waiver, and then specialized equipment and supplies are for people who are on BI-CAC or CADI. So that's where you're going to fund any kind of assistive technology, meaning any kind of technology that helps someone do something for themselves that they would otherwise need staff to do for them or assist them with. And then there's kind of this other piece, whereas, so sometimes the technology may have a mechanism that alerts a staff or caregiver when there may be something that they need to be cued in on. And so if the device has a mechanism that can alert a staff or caregiver, then that device technically meets the definition of monitoring technology. And if equipment meets the definition of monitoring technology, there is a consent form that needs to be completed for data privacy and HIPAA purposes primarily. It's informed consent. But the cool thing is that then that equipment can be funded under environmental accessibility adaptations if it meets the definition of monitoring technology. And what's great about that is because the environmental accessibility adaptation service has a cap of $40,000 annually, whereas specialized equipment and supplies has a cap of $39,009 annually. Assistive technology doesn't have a cap. So it's a little bit more, open for people who are on the DD waiver. But we are working on that as well. In fact, there is a proposal to increase the specialized equipment and supplies cap from 3,909 to 10,000 annually. And that is looking like it's going to be approved if it hasn't been already. So that is great news. But even still, there are some devices that can be quite costly. And so if you can, anytime you can save on that specialized equipment and supplies budget by utilizing environmental accessibility, adaptations, monitoring technology classification, that's going to be helpful. All right. Next slide, please. So we have remote support approved for this slide hasn't been updated in a minute, but remote support has actually been approved for over 25 services. So since this slide was created, we have since gotten approval for CDCS, as well as Adult Day is going to be have a remote support option beginning July 1st. But for the 24 services that we had approved at the end of 2021, there was a 1-year rolling implementation for people to, there was the temporary approval and guidance under the public health emergency, but then there's the permanent remote support, a policy that's been approved by CMS for an ongoing basis outside of the public health emergencies. So at this point, everyone that you have who is utilizing remote support should be doing so under that remote support policy, because there's been a full year of rolling implementation. If you have someone that is not, so there's special modifiers for many of the services that have a remote option. And so when you're when you're service planning, you want to, if there's a service that someone is, that you want to authorize for someone, then the next question is, how much of this service would you like remotely versus in person? And there's different modifiers to use based on whether it's in person or remote. It does not change the rate that the service provider receives. It's merely for tracking how much remote support is happening, because DHS truly has goals around increasing remote support across the state. And so we'll be running reports to kind of see where utilization is strong, where utilization is maybe not happening, and then reaching out to those lead agencies where it's not happening to provide additional technical assistance. So that's why it's important to have the modifier being used if you are using it. Otherwise, it's going to look like you're not utilizing any remote support, and then people are going to think you're going to need some technical assistance. So please use that modifier. As I said, it's paid the same rate. And then for a complete list of the services that have a remote option, you can click on this link or check out the remote support policy. Okay, next slide, and I'm going to let my dog out really quick. Sorry about that. Okay, so remote support is the provision of a covered service by a staff or caregiver who is in a remote location and is engaged with a person through enabling technology that utilizes live two-way communication. So that's kind of a mouthful. Next slide. I believe, yes. So enabling technology. What is enabling technology? Enabling technology is whatever technology is being used to make that on-demand remote support and supervision possible. So there's some examples listed here, but really anything that meets the requirement for live two-way communication meets the definition of enabling technology. So if you're authorizing some remote support service provision for someone, then the next question kind of naturally is, are there technology needs to make that remote support possible? And if so, then you would authorize that technology under the services I just mentioned, either assistive technology, SES, or monitoring technology, depending on if it meets the definition. All right, next slide. So live two-way communication. Now, this is very important because we did have the IHS service had rolled out a few years back, and that was the first service that had like a remote support component to it. However, it was very limited. It was limited to text, phone call, and maybe FaceTime, I think is what it was. So that's not going to work for everyone. So we wanted to have the definition really work for everyone, because we want remote support to be for everyone. So it's the real-time transmission of information between a person and an actively involved caregiver. This is the important part here. It can be conveyed through the exchange of speech, visuals, signals, or writing, but must flow both ways and be in actual time. So the important thing there is that sometimes the person that you're supporting isn't going to be able to identify when they need assistance and actively reach out to a caregiver for that assistance. So sometimes they may need assistance and not really be aware of it. And so that's where some of this different technology, such as sensors or cameras or GPS devices, can be very helpful in that they can allow a person to utilize remote support who doesn't have the capability of picking up a phone and calling their provider. So just wanted to highlight that. All right, next slide. And this is all in the remote support policy, but just some things to keep in mind. You know, it's got to be chosen and preferred as the service delivery method by the person or their guardian, appropriately meets assessed needs, is provided within the scope of the service being delivered, meaning that the scope of the service and all of the covered services that are covered under that service still need to be provided, whether it's remote or in person. You can't just say like, well, because it's remote, we're only going to carve out this smaller subset of covered services. And then is provided as specified in the person's support plan. Okay, thank you. Next slide. So why is incorporating support technology so important? Staffing shortages would be a huge one. Assistive technology and remote support offer our greatest chance at surviving the current and future staffing issues, which are projected to only become worse, as I mentioned. And a lot of times people think that all our problems would be solved if the wage rate for direct support professionals was higher. And I agree wholeheartedly that it would probably be better. However, there are just not enough bodies, no matter how much the positions pay. There are literally not going to be enough bodies or people to meet the needs, the growing needs of people who are aging and or have disabilities or both. So this next bullet is very important. DHS DHS's workforce shortage work group has identified support technology, so assistive technology and remote support, as the premier promising practice to assist with staffing shortages. And so that's DHS, but I should also acknowledge that that's nationally as well. This isn't just DHS's smart little idea. It's nationally recognized as the promising practice to assist with staffing shortages, because like I said, there's just not going to be enough people. So we have to work on getting people more independent, using technology whenever and wherever possible, and every little bit helps. So, all right, I will stop there.
All right, then I think that might be me. Elena?
Trying to spotlight and all that. Yeah, I wanted to open it up real quick for questions. I know sometimes it takes a little bit of time to actually submit your questions in the chat or to start feeling comfortable to unmute yourselves and ask questions. But just from our previous trainings, I know we typically have a lot of questions from case managers and assessors after Anna's talked, especially about some of those updated rules. One of the big ones being the change from DHS's perspective that now technology is okay to be approved if it helps staff. That's a big one that we've seen really change more in the last year and a half, where it used to be very clearly that you had to write why it was for independence, and if it benefited staff, there was the question of if a provider should pay for it. So I just wanted to open it up. What questions do you all have? I'm looking down the line for unmutes or chats. All right, then I might share some of the common questions that we've had and heard. So one of them, I don't think that you addressed this, Anna, was when you talked about the EAA, the two bids. Two bids being required if somebody is requesting the exception report over 40,000. That always brings up the question, even though this isn't necessarily a DME based training, but the question does come up about not DME, home modifications. Are home modifications allowed in CRS settings, in a provider owned setting?
Yeah,
So
that's
want to answer that.
Yeah, that's a great question, Elena. And yes, EAA can be approved for CRS settings in addition to person's own home or family home. And the reason being is that we don't want people to have to move or relocate as their needs change. People may be in their home for a number of years, and they're just aging, you know, and they're needing more accessibility, maybe in the bathroom, or you know, some different things. And we don't want someone to have to move to a place that has an accessible bathroom. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Especially when there are provider shortages and staffing shortages. So if somebody needs a home modification to maintain living in their current living situation, that is something that can totally be approved under the waiver.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of some of the other common questions that we have. One of them I know that comes up frequently, and I think a few of you guys do work with the elderly waiver. So when Anna talked about the exception, that does not apply to EW. So EW, unfortunately, at this time, still has a cap of only $20,000 per year. And that does not have an exception process where you can get additional funds at this point in time. That is something that we are trying to get together with DHS to pursue, kind of mirroring what they've done with the disability services waivers. But I just wanted to make that clear for those of you that do work with the EW waiver. Anna, do you have anything to add to that?
No, the only thing that does remind me of though too is that EW and AC doesn't have that 3909 cap that CADI or BI have for assistive technology equipment. So so it's really just CADI and BI that have the 3909 cap, but hopefully that's changing soon as well.
Awesome. And I may have been focused on the slides or trying to figure some stuff out with the presentation, but did you mention the July 1st change for the specialized equipment and supplies in AT with the modifier?
No, I didn't. I mean, I briefly alluded to that it was at one of these trainings years ago where I found out that code was such a barrier. So the issue was anything that was coded as T2029 underwent this complex review process, which can take like 45, 90 days, too long anyway, especially given that bids are only good for 30 days. So what's happening now is that beginning July 1st, and there will be information coming out about this, but there's going to be, well, there's always been a modifier for assessments. And then there's going to be an additional modifier for if it's assistive technology versus specialized equipment and supplies. So if it has I think it's UD, I think it's what it's going to be, because I think UB is assessments. If you code it as UD, which you will be able to do beginning July 1st, then it will bypass that complex review process because it's assistive technology and not durable medical equipment that can be covered by MA, and we already know that. So instead of dragging the process on, it'll just be able to go through approvals just like any other service would, as it should. So so that's exciting. That will be happening beginning July 1st. And then initially it will be just for people who are on the DD waiver. And then after the ARPA, the American Rescue Plan funding time period is over and we can combine those two services, it will be for all waiver types.
Thank you, Anna. Since we're not doing this in person and you can't see all of our presenters reacting to this, this is really, really great news. It's been something that Anna's been working on, like she said, for a while now. And it really should make assistive technology approvals substantially easier and substantially faster. That also means on your guys' end, the good news with that is by not going through that complex review process, you shouldn't be getting those kickbacks where they're saying, denied because you didn't put in the descriptor correctly or X, Y, or Z. It's going to go through much faster. So hopefully it should make your jobs a little bit easier too when you're working with it. Now I'm trying to think, I'm going to open it up again for questions from you guys. Is there any questions?
Well, while we're just paused, I will just say one thing that's been kind of fun. We've done a few of these trainings now, and we're starting to get lead agencies following up with us about questions that they're like kind of revisiting, things that they had previously denied or thought that they had to deny. Now they're like, maybe we can take another look at that, and they're finding that it can be approved. So so yeah, so it's very exciting to see the shift. I do, and nobody's blaming anybody for the lag. If it's anybody's fault, it's DHS's, because I know that years ago technology was thought of as more of like a luxury item versus something that a right somebody has to equipment that can allow them to be independent. So that's been a shift. And I know that there's always this fear of doing something wrong or being out of compliance, but but yeah, it definitely has changed, and that's really the primary message behind all of this, is that we want you to feel comfortable authorizing assistive technology remote supports, because that's going to be so needed.
Well, and just to stress for, like I said at the beginning, like Anna said, people are following these trainings. So we hope you feel very encouraged to reach out and ask questions. It can be very, very case specific. You obviously don't have to give any personal identifiers, but sharing circumstances that you're looking for, or situations where maybe, like Anna said, maybe in the past you denied it or it was denied by DHS, and now let's see if we can revisit it now that the rules are kind of changing. The briefcase document that Anna mentioned is helpful even for people within DHS to understand some of the interpretations of the rules. One of the things that we always say is that the rules were written gray intentionally, but unfortunately the way that people have interpreted it, and like Anna said, it's no one's fault but DHS's. Unfortunately, Anna's always the bad guy. But she's also the good guy because she's here talking about it and clarifying things. But the rules were written gray, and it was intended to make things easier to approve and provide for individuals. Unfortunately, that kind of naturally swung in the other direction, where for most lead agencies, they felt like because it wasn't explicitly stated that something could be approved, then they should deny it. What we're really, really trying to encourage, and what we hope you take away from the training today, is that it's the opposite. If it's not explicitly stated that it cannot be approved, you should be approving it. And one of the things with that, which we're going to take a little break, because I know remote trainings they're not as easy to sit through 3 hours as an in-person training can be. But after our break, we're going to come back and we're going to talk about want versus need and assessments. So Matt, that's when I'll have you talk. I know you were catching my back, which I appreciate, to jump in and cover the time. But we're going to take a break right now then. Obviously, feel free to submit your questions too. If you had some that come to mind while we're taking the break, we'll reconvene at 2 o'clock. So everybody jump back on, go grab a glass of water, take a bathroom break, submit a question, stretch, whatever you need to do. And we'll see you again at 2 o'clock.
Thanks, Elena.
Yeah, thank you all. So I hope you all had a chance to stretch, grab some water, all the things that you needed to do. Like I said, we're going to now jump into want versus need. Again, might be a section where you guys have more pushback or questions for us. So please don't hesitate to unmute yourselves or submit questions via chat. Matt, I'll let you take it away if you're available.
I am. Thank you, Elena. I appreciate that. As Elena said, my section is on assessments and then want versus need. Assessments are going to be pretty straightforward, and want versus need is not. So I do encourage questions and my fellow presenters to feel free to jump in with anything that you have to say. So to start the section with the assessments, the first question I generally get is an assessment strictly necessary for assistive technology items? No. If you have a pretty good idea what the item is going to be, for example, if we just need a tracking watch, a personal response unit, some different sorts of alerts in the house for pressure pads, give an ATP a call. Give one of the people on this meeting a call. Let's talk about it for a couple of minutes. Let's find out the right thing, because there are a lot of little differences that can make a big difference for a person. But if it's something that we can figure out in the course of a phone call with a number of questions, then there you go. We certainly don't need an assessment. It's something that can get paid for through the waiver, shipped to the home, and the caregivers and the person supported can go ahead and set that up. If it is something that's going to be a little bit more complicated, that's going to need programming, especially on-site programming, home automation equipment, we might need to have boots on the ground and really go in there and take a look at the locks, take a look at the lights, take a look at the placement, test the Wi-Fi signal, do all of 100 different things that an assistive technology professional is going to do. We're going to ask some questions about the comfort level of technology of not only the person supported and seeing what they're using now, but the caregivers and the guardians, because we really want to know about the technology comfort level with the people who are going to be supporting the person that we're serving, because that's going to play a big part in what it is that we recommend. So for two very similar circumstances, we may recommend two very different things for a similar challenge because of the situation that they're in, the home that they're in, the caregivers that they have. So there's a whole lot of variation there. And over time, as you get more comfortable with technology, the assessments may not be needed as much. But like I said, if we're going to be looking at more complicated systems, they're almost always going to be very, very useful. It keeps us from getting there to do an installation and, well, doing it wrong. Better to measure twice, cut once, do things slow and right rather than fast and wrong. That brings us to the want versus need section, and the evaluation is going to help us out quite a bit, evaluating what it is that a person has decided that they want and what it is that they really need. Do they need lighting in their apartment? Yes. Do they need colored lights? Maybe. Do we have different visual and acuity issues where we might need brighter lights? We might need to be able to dim the lights. We may have different behavioral challenges which do require different colored lighting and the ability to change colored lighting. So with the assessment, we're really going to find some of these different things out. Do we want a security system, or do we need a monitoring system to help with the safety of the individual, not necessarily from people coming in, but from people going out, right? We're also going to really want to work in partnership with the case manager on this one. When we're going and doing an assessment and we're speaking with people about the different needs that they have, 99% of the time we're getting good information from the person. But every once in a while, the information that we're getting is the information that they want us to hear. and we're not getting 100% accurate picture. So after an evaluation is done, and after we're speaking with a person about what it is they believe their needs are, we're going to want to get your perspective too, and the perspective from other people involved, and really find out why. Anytime an assistive technology professional suggests a device, we also have the justification for the device either written down, usually, or also, if it's not completely detailed, it's in the back of our minds of why they need this device. We're never going to just suggest something without a justification for it, just because a person said, I think I need this. Let's really dig into how it benefits you now and how it's going to benefit you in the future. And then also, how can we modify that device to continue to meet your needs as things change in the future? So Elena, I'm going to invite you back in as well, and kind of do me a favor and help prompt me a little bit on this want versus need section.
The reason that this is a common question is you've already kind of tapped on it. A lot of case managers that we've heard from have suggested that sometimes it is very hard for them to determine if somebody says that they are just wanting it, if there is something that ties back to their assessed need. So one of the points of clarification is that in an assessment, there does not need to be a note in the assessment that that person needs assistive technology for you to be able to use assistive technology. So that's something I don't think that's commonly misunderstood, but just so you guys know, it does not need to be said explicitly in the assessment that the individual can use assistive technology for you to turn around and then apply it. Like, so you can just apply assistive tech without that being written in the assessment. But for that need versus want, when it comes to a person's assessed need and their disability and being able to relate it back, sometimes there are gray areas. Some of the examples that I've heard from case managers are things like an Apple Watch. Somebody's like, hey, those are cool. I want one of those. And maybe the way that the person says it, or maybe your first reaction is, well, you just want it because who doesn't want an Apple Watch, right? Like, I'd like somebody else to pay for my Apple Watch. That'd be great. So the idea that we wanted to talk about this was really to encourage you guys to figure out if there is a possible need when people are coming with requests like that, or if mom or dad are asking for something for their son or daughter or child that they support. Just making sure that you're considering the option that maybe even if it's presented as a want, there really truly may be a need. So with the example for an Apple Watch, right? Like, so maybe mom says, yeah, I think it'd be pretty cool. Like, all of her friends have an Apple Watch, so I think that she should have one too, so she fits in. All right, that sounds a little bit like a want. Mom's trying to say it in a way that's like, oh, it's inclusive and all of that. But the next steps that you could ask yourself, instead of kind of that knee-jerk reaction being like, well, no, then you can pay for it for her. That can be a Christmas or birthday present, right? It could be, well, okay, how do you think she's going to use it? And then mom might say, well, I think all her friends get their text messages on it. But I also think that it would be really cool if she could get notifications reminding her to do something. And that's where you start to say, okay, flagged that may be a need. So let's dig into that. Like, okay, well, I see in the assessment that this person has an ADHD diagnosis, right? So maybe getting prompts on their wrist really is something that could help them stay on top of daily tasks. Or one of the common things is sometimes you need some slow, subtle disruptions, like having a vibrating alarm or something on your wrist, on your person, can bring you out of like a fixation state or something like that. So when I say like the want versus need, sometimes there are absolutely wants. Matt hit on that. You hit on that really well. Like, sometimes families are just asking for things that they want. But oftentimes there is something that might tie it back for the reason why they're wanting that goes outside of them just wanting it, that can actually be tied to a need. And the thing that we're encouraging you to do with approving more assistive technology is to have those conversations, ask those open-ended questions, and really see if you can help them find a way that this is covering the needs that they have. Not necessarily because you're trying to use waiver dollars to buy something that they want. That's not it. You're trying to make sure that with technology, you're covering anything that could help them have a more successful and independent life and help them with their disability. So that's kind of the idea. Matt, you leaned forward. Did you have something to add?
No, I was thinking, and be assured, those questions that Elena was bringing up are questions that we're going to ask. We always want to be good stewards of the county's money. It's not that we have any problem whatsoever spending the county's money. It's just, let's spend it on the right things, and let's spend it on the person who needs it. Because trust me, we'll find a way. But let's find the right person and the right need for those dollars.
So do you guys have any questions at this point? The reason that I would really encourage you guys to even share situations that you've personally encountered where you weren't sure is because you've got a lot of experts on this call right now that can help you kind of process through maybe some of those requests that you've received, or situations where your knee-jerk reaction was to say no, or it seems very, very hard to say this could be justified with it waiver dollars. Like, I'm encouraging you to share those situations or ask questions or push back on that. Let's see. Oh, we did get a question in the chat here. So get requests for playground equipment, sensory swings. Should these be covered? That is an incredibly timely question. Anna, I'm mentioning you. Anna and I were just asked this earlier today from a case manager who's working with an individual who the sensory swings specifically will help them focus and not be destructive. So the family member was asking for it. There was an autism diagnosis. So Anna, what was your response to that?
Yes, the waiver can cover it. Yeah, because it met their assessed need in terms of they would have increased aggression or behaviors, and that the swing was a good calming technique for them. But yet they swung so much that just a regular swing, they would wear it out. So they needed a special, more adapted swing. And yeah, that meets the criteria. I mean, yeah. So
That
and
really
sensory,
is-
oh, you know what I want to point out though, is sensory items is assistive technology. And we have not been clear on that in the CBSM to date. However, this supplemental guidance document that's coming out does make that clear, that sensory items such as like fidgets, those types of things, as well as sensory technology, so like wearables that can pick up on increases in someone's biometrics that might indicate that they're about to have a behavior or in a blood level, sugar level crash, or what have you. There's like these different things, and that's all coverable as well. And that will be in the briefcase document. That is in the briefcase document that'll be coming out soon.
Sensory items, sensory swings, and things like that can end up being incredibly difficult as well. If there is a history with an occupational therapist who has recommended items in the past and the person likes them, then we're going to lean on that heavily. With what Anna's saying, some of the equipment can be extremely expensive too. And as a matter of fact, a platform swing, I am getting one delivered to my office today, which we'll be bringing out. And I see Sue just jumped on too. And I love that she's going to jump in because she is an occupational therapist.
Yeah, and I'll talk
please.
more when I talk, but I just want to make sure that everyone knows, like, when you do a sensory swing, you need a construction worker to do the install, because it can't just go in the ceiling regularly. It has to have the right bolting, the right structure for it to be secure. And so unless the family has a swing set it's going on, it's really important that there's lots of pieces to that besides just the swing. So just to keep that in mind also, and then always have an occupational therapist involved in picking that swing out, making sure a sensory assessment is done There's a lot more to sensory equipment than just the equipment.
Obviously, we all work together and talk to each other
Yes.
a lot. And it just took 4 people to say yes.
Well, I was going to add too, because you kind of said outside of just the sensory swings, you mentioned other playground equipment. One of the questions that we do get asked and is a little bit more complicated for getting approved is adaptive recreation equipment. So Anna, do you want to provide the language for adaptive recreation equipment and like when that can be approved versus when that shouldn't be?
Well, we have a pretty lengthy policy response on that, and I wonder if it wouldn't be better to just send that out. But because it's a pretty thorough response and it's pretty helpful. It would take quite a while to talk, to get through the whole thing. But it really comes down to the person's assessed needs. Whether or not so like an adaptive bike, for example, maybe somebody is using it to get to work, or to be able to get out in the community and go to the park and go for walks and things like that, that they're wanting to do. But yet sometimes for people, bicycling is recreational, just for fun. Okay. But because somebody is needing an adaptive bike for a specific need, the assessed need falls back to their mobility assessed need. So if they have a mobility assessed need and this adaptive bike would meet that need, it is okay to authorize that bike. You don't have to worry like, oh, but it could be fun. There's nothing wrong with something also being fun. The waiver is not against fun, but it does have to relate back to an assessed need. And the assessed need in this case is mobility then. Yes.
And I see that Renee raised her hand and she'd also submitted a question about CDCS. So Renee, you want to take it away? Oh, and I think you're muted still.
Thank you. I have a lot of parents that put requests in for the use of CDCS services for sensory equipment. And we've consulted with DHS on items such as a trampoline. And we were specifically said or told no, because that item, for example, is recreational in nature. So for a very long time, we've been denying such items because of that guidance. And what you're saying today is in complete contrast to what we've been historically told.
Yeah. So, and I think that I really think that the division has just kind of loosened up some of the regulations around that, recognizing the whole, if we really truly want to be person-centered and there's wants and needs, we all have wants and desires of things that we need, that we want to do or try. And if we need adaptive devices to be able to do that, that's different. This is not the first time though that I've heard that this is in contrast to what is coming back from CDCS responses. And I'm not sure how, you said quite some time in response to that response. So I don't know how long ago that response was about CDCS for one, but I am going to check on that after the training, because that is a separate division, or not a separate division, a separate unit within DSD. So I will talk to Cindy Greben about that and just ensure that we're on the same page, or if there are differences, what those are.
There are a couple more questions, and of course I'm going to throw them back to Anna, because I'm certainly not the one who's going to say, yes, pay for this. But Renee, the way you had said that, and then Anna noted it too, where you said this had happened some time ago, and for a long time, this is the response you've been giving. I think it's time to check into these regulations again, because one of the reasons that we're doing all of this now is that things have changed quite a bit. The thinking over at DHS has shifted and knows that assistive technology really is the future for the people that we help support in so many ways. It's almost, and I can't say this, but I'm going to, it's almost better to overcorrect to get to the median than to not correct the situation at all. Anna?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes back to also what Elena was saying in regards to the guidance that isn't in the policy pages. You know, for the most part, I think it's, I don't have it memorized, but like increase ADLs, increase communication, access to the community, increase independence. I mean, those are pretty generic high level things. So if you can justify that a device or a piece of equipment meets those meets those needs, then, or meets that criteria, then you should feel confident authorizing it. And if there is something that you authorize that you shouldn't have, or, you know, like if there is you know, like don't be afraid of making a mistake, because if there's a mistake made, all it would be a consultation. You know, it would be like, oh, hey, in the future, let's, you know, keep this in mind. So, I mean, I just think that people have like this fear of getting in trouble, that kind of sometimes paralyzes them from acting on something, even if they believe it is fully appropriate. And so if you really feel like it's appropriate and it meets the needs, you know, the person, the people know the person, feel confident in authorizing that.
I'm glad that you said that, Anna, right? Because that needs to come from you more than it can from any of us to tell you guys really, truly, like, go for it, right? Like, we're doing these trainings. DHS is partnered with us to set up and schedule these trainings. They're here on this call because they really, really do want you to use this more. They want you to be approving it. We're actually going to be looking at numbers too, to see if there's an increase in assistive technology usage and remote support usage. It's really, truly, truly a goal of DHS's. So, like Anna said, you're not going to get in trouble. It's going to be maybe a conversation. And then sometimes DHS might be wrong too when they come to you to have a conversation about it. You can push back. You can explain why you thought it was for the assessed need and make that argument. You know your clients better than DHS does. You know the people that you support, and there's a reason that you're their case manager. So just to clarify, there was two more questions on adaptive type equipment. So would the waiver only pay for the cost difference from a non-adaptive bike?
Oftentimes that there are things like that where if it depends. Yeah, it depends. I mean, like you can say what is the average cost of an average bicycle versus an adapted bike. Sometimes people will buy a regular bike, and then the waiver will pay for the adaptations done to that. So it kind of depends on if it's kind of something that already comes that way, or if it needs to be adapted. Oftentimes the waiver there's certain things around like appliances and things like that. So like if we recently had a question about a water heater, there were a number of children in the house who all had this same condition where their water temperature had to be a very, very specific temperature. And so they needed a smart water heater. Now the waiver can't pay for appliances. So the waiver couldn't pay for the full water heater, but the waiver was able to pay for the difference between the smart water heater and a regular water heater, thus covering the assistive tech portion of the water heater. So there's things that can be done like that as well. Excuse me, my dog just came in. I will send out that I think I sent it out for that other lead agency earlier today. So I will send, so I think that would be good to include, because I think it really walks it through, and it was written by the Informed Choice Policy team. So I like to use their language.
Yeah, I'll be sure to share that. Just because we're referencing what I'll share with you guys Anna's PowerPoints, any of the presenters' PowerPoints from today. And then as well, I've created a PowerPoint that Anna already mentioned that has resources for who you can reach out to with specific questions like this, as well as, what agencies do what. So like what PERS providers exist, what assistive tech and what remote support providers are out there, and then resource providers as well. So I'll get that all sent out to you guys. One more question that came in. I just want to make sure that we address this because I'm actually very curious on it too, Anna. Backyard fencing for kids under age 8. So if I'm thinking in a situation where tying it back to a disability, maybe that kid has elopement risks or things like that. Is it approved? And then my question would be, because my assumption is it'd be approved under EAA. Is that correct?
Yeah, so that would be approved under EAA if it met a disability assessed need. So like if the child had elopement issues, that's typically where we see fences come in. Yeah.
I have a unique question to that. Sorry, I'm going to ask follow-up questions now. Say there was a child who had like strong fear of animals, and like neighbors had dogs, or they were in like an area that could get deer and things like that. Could a fence be approved in circumstances like that because it was tied back to a disability related need as well? Because like with their diagnosis, that's where that fear was coming from. And it could cause
potentially, yeah. I mean, I could see where that could maybe happen. I also am not the EAA policy lead. I do oversee the monitoring technology component of that, but I probably shouldn't get into too many specifics about that just because I'm not the lead on that.
And quickly, as one of the people on this call who would be asked about that, I am going to encourage you to contact a home modification assessor.
Mm-hmm.
We can all only be as good at, boy, did that not work well in my mind. We can only all do well at so many things, and the home modification people are very good with assessment for the fences and ramps and many of the different modifications. We are very good at technology. So when it comes to something like that, I really would encourage you to reach out to a home modification assessor.
Yeah, and the Centers for Independent Living can be very, very helpful with that too. And sometimes they're able to look at other funding options as well outside the waiver too, that they're often able to tap into.
Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons that I asked that question specifically is because I want to encourage you guys to think creatively, right? Like one of the things that we often do is we throw people at a problem, right? Like, okay, well, if this person gets fearful in the backyard, we'll just have mom or dad stay out there with them. That's not always the option, right? That's not always the reliable thing. If there is another solution to it, thinking creatively, thinking about assistive technology options, or in this case, like home modification options that might be able to meet that need, go for it. Please go for it. We want you to think creatively. We want you to step outside of the norm, outside of the box. Don't send staff to the problem or an individual to help them. Create something else, create another opportunity. And if you don't know, no worries. Like Matt said, we can all only be good at the things that we're good at, right? If you try to spread yourself too thin, you're not going to be good at anything. So ask the experts too. We do not expect you to remember everything we talk about today. We don't expect you to be able to sit down and have a full open-ended conversation like what Matt does and do a full-blown assessment during that process of everything that they're going to need. No, that's what we're here for as well. So any other questions? And I've got the chat open, but feel free. I mean, that was lovely, Renee, raising the hand. That was a good flag for me to see that you had a question. So if anybody has questions too, please feel free to do it that way as well. Otherwise, then I think now would be a good time to move on to some examples of technology. So Sue, I'm going to kick it over to you if you are available.
Yes, I'm here. So I have a PowerPoint. I'm going to talk about our services and show the technology together. Is that okay?
Sounds great.
Perfect. All right. So let me share my screen. Okay. Just 1 second. I'm trying to, doesn't let me see everything. Here we go. All right. So as I mentioned, I'm with Live Life Therapy Solutions. So when I talk about assistive technology and show you some ideas for things, I'm talking about it from an occupational therapist, speech therapist, physical therapist, or engineer's background. So we're a little different in that we do also in my company do durable medical equipment. We do ramps, and we will help look at some of the fencing needs that you guys were talking about, but we don't do the construction part, but we do a lot of assessments so that you know if it's related to the person's disability. So I call us like medical model working in the social realm because we don't bill MA or insurance or anything. So when people can go to those resources, we want them to go there first. But there's many people who need their technology completed in the home or their assessments for durable medical equipment completed in their home. They can't go to a clinic, and there's less and less home care agencies, and a lot of them do not know assistive technology. So when we run into that, we do have grants and we do have billable services to provide that. So we do a lot of what Matt was talking about and others have been talking about, but we do a little bit of different things just because we are therapists too. All right, so Technology for Home is a grant we've had the longest, and we've had that for over 10 years now. And that grant is for helping people all over Minnesota for assistive technology needs that are complex, that need a complex team, are really far from like centrally located places. And so it would be really hard to have a billable service for that person. So as more and more things are becoming billable, Technology for Home is really focusing on the things that can't be done in any other way. So what you guys will see when you make referrals to Tech for Home, if I do see things in there that I know there's local resources for, or there's other providers that are doing that, or they can build a waiver for it, I am putting those in that direction because we want to save grant funding for the things that can't be done. And the good thing is that there's more and more that can be done with waivers, which we want for funding, even the assessment and the services. But there's always going to be things that are very complex in nature, complex because of where it is. So that's why grants are important to supplement that. And so that's what Tech for Home is all about. And then AT for Wellness is a new grant that we have, and I'm going to talk about that as we go along too. That grant is for helping people in Minnesota that need telehealth equipment or equipment to be able to remote on for mental health appointments, or it can be for recreational visits that they do remotely, or support groups that they're in, or to reach out to their family who's supporting them. So it is really to look at technology and the types of services someone needs to get that set up for them. And so it can be used to pay for both. We have a certain amount of funding for each person that we see, but that program does have a little over a year left, and we haven't been at capacity yet. So I really want to encourage people that if you do know that the waiver can't pay for certain things for telehealth, or it's already been denied, or maybe it paid for the equipment, but no one's been able to help the person learn how to use it or to try their telehealth visits, because that can be really hard for people that have never done that before. I want you to keep us in mind for anyone that is in your area or central Minnesota or the cities. And then the Lighthouse Center for Vital Living is in northern Minnesota. So they're doing the Arrowhead area. And if we get a referral for them, we'll give it to them too. And so we have referrals for Tech for Home and for AT for Wellness and Live Life Therapy Solutions, which is our billable services, on livelifetherapysolutions.com. And that'll be in my handouts, and I'll also put it in the chat for you too. So you can make a referral there. And then if you make a referral and it ends up the person needs more than one service, then I help you to know that and get them into other services too. So what I'm going to be showing you today is equipment that relates to communication assessments. And when I talk about communication assessments, just to frame it so we all understand, is that there are many people who are unable to communicate with their voice, their wants, needs, and desires 70% or more of the time in a way that others can understand them. When that happens, then we need to look at alternative ways that that person can communicate. And that's what we consider as AAC, or communication assessments. I know a lot of people use phones and technology for communication, and that means that physically they're using that to send an email or a text message or things like that. So I just want to make it really clear that AAC is when the person can't talk, or can't talk most of the time, or can't be understood most of the time. And that needs a speech therapist. So when I show that equipment today, it's really important to note that that's durable medical equipment, requires the assessment of a speech therapist, and medical assistance insurance and Medicare can pay for the device if you do go through that route and have a speech therapist assess the need, do trials, do training, that device can be paid for by the medical model. I'm also going to show equipment for electronic daily living aids and smart home or environmental control technology and sensory, which we talked about. And then I'm going to show some samples of durable medical equipment and some simple home modifications that OTs or PTs can be involved in, and safety equipment and power mobility. Keep in mind when I show you what OT, PT, speech and engineers do, I'm not saying that it has to be my company that does it, because I always want people to use their local resources. So oftentimes, and I'll point this out in when I show the equipment, clinics can do a lot of these things, and that should be the first referral source. Or if the child's in school, some schools will do assistive technology as part of their school. The person still might need to go to a clinic if things are related to home and not just to school and home. And then we are looking at assistive technology referral sources for waiver or grants that are available. For assistive technology, the simpler things like we do for AT for Wellness for telehealth, it can be really frustrating if people just get a computer or get a smartphone or get a tablet and then no one teaches them how to use it for what they're remoting onto. And so I want us to keep in mind that not everyone has the same experiences with technology or the same learning. And so that setup, that training, that practice can be critical, and it can make or break the technology being used. So I don't want us to think anything's too simple. Some things, like some people can pick up on really complex things really quick. And so to be person-centered, we know that, and they won't need as much training. But there's a lot of people who that is not the case for, and then that training and that setup and special directions written out are really important and helpful for them to use that technology. Some technology is not designed as easily to be user-friendly. A lot of technology does have a lot of built-in adaptations now that are part of the device, but many people don't know that, and a lot of families don't know how to get into those or how to set them up or what can help the person, and are afraid to touch that. And so I just want us to keep in mind too that those kinds of things are really important in considering assistive technology training and setup too. And then there's a lot of technology that's out there, and then there's a lot of different people that are out there, and not just adding in the differences of the person, but adding in cultural differences, language differences. All of that can be hugely important to take into account for that technology that you pick, and then also for how you're going to do the training, what supports are added that are needed. Do we need an interpreter? Do we need captioning? All of that for making the training critical and important to that person are really important. I talked about waiver billable services before, that we do them, and we bill all different waivers too. So as long as somebody has a waiver, we do have billing codes that we can see people through billable services. I'm going to show some of the assistive technology. So we do a lot of low tech technology. So that means like things that are off the shelf or easy to purchase, but we're using them in an adaptive way. And oftentimes we're going into the settings and we're changing things so that they work better for that person. We can use things like remote control lights. So you can buy remote control lights even at stores like Home Depot and things that have lighting, that have control that person can use to be able to use the light. There are lights that come on that are motion sensors, like that hallway picture that's there. And so a lot of people that I see need lighting at night, but they don't want to leave their lights on all night. And so adding some remote lights that either plug in, if there's plugins on the way through the hallway, or that are battery powered, that can work, that have motion sensors on them. So when the person walks by, the lights come on, and then when they walk by and then they don't, after a while, the lights go back off. We also do try really hard to use technologies that the person already has. So if somebody already has like an Apple phone or an iPad, we're going to try to use like an Apple device if we can, the Apple Smart Home Kit if we can, or low tech things that just plug in to a wall and the device plugs into that, and the person has a remote to turn things on and off. We can also add some switches into some of the different remote controls that we have available, so that the person can have a bigger button to be able to turn things on and off. So sometimes it's those easy things that can be all the person needs. It doesn't have to be something that's super fancy or super complicated. Memory aids and reminder tools. So medication reminders are a really big thing and really important for people. This one is the Dose Health medication reminder. There are some that are larger and some that are smaller. I just showed an example of one. The nice thing about medication reminders is that the person can have their medication set up for them for a day or a week or more at a time. And then the device itself helps remind the person to take it. And then sometimes also offers a physical way for them to, like the Dose one, to flip it into a cup to be able to have easier access to it. And so looking at the different medication reminders and picking the right one for the person. They also can send out alerts and reminders to others if the person hasn't taken them, even with their reminder. So they can be really important for that need of medications and not having someone there 24/7. And then smartphones, if a person already has a smartphone and that's the right tool for them, we can add apps onto the smartphone. We can teach the person how to use their schedule and reminder tools that are built into that. So we try really hard to look at what does the person already have that they know how to use, and does it make sense to add something to that tool because they already know it. Voice recorders are still being used. I think people forget about those, but all different types of voice recorders can be very helpful. I have people using those throughout the day. They bring it with in their purse or their backpack or their pocket, and they just add reminders to it that they want to put into their calendar when they get home, or they might add things in that they want to remember that they did throughout the day. So they're a very useful tool. We have not moved past those. That might be all that someone needs. There's also different voice tools that have voice recording on them that have software built in so that person can download it onto their computer and it puts it right into a document for them. And so we do use those a lot still. Alerting devices, these can be really simple too. I have a lot of people who need a strobe alert for different things in their home, like when the doorbell rings, when the fire alarm goes off, things like that. And so adding a strobe or adding a different noise or a sound or something that we can do to tools that are already in the home, but the person needs them done in a different way. Having a alarm that has a vibration to the bed. So it can vibrate and the person can feel that their alarm is going off. Or it can also have a strobe related to that. So those are really helpful and useful to keeping the items that the person has or changing them or using one that they're able to use in a different way. We do a lot with low vision aids. And so we bring out a lot of tools to try and or we borrow things from low vision stores to be able to try. There's a lot of great tools that are available on Apple products. So if somebody already has a tablet or they already have a smartphone and it's Apple, we can add a lot of apps that do magnification, or they can add apps that can read a label or read what the person wants to read on their mail. So there's a lot of things we can do with apps right through a tablet. But there's also a lot of smart low technology tools now that are low tech that are smaller, because a lot of the really big like CC TVs that we use, those are so large to bring to the community. They can be complex to learn how to use. So the companies are making a lot more simple handheld products or simpler table products to use, because a lot of people want to use them for mail or use them for simpler things and not just for like the larger things. And so the small handheld tools are really nice to bring out to magnify something to see, and it gives it lighting, or to be able to take a picture of it and have it read to you if it's a label or if it's something that's small to be able to read, or a menu when you're out and about. And then there are smaller magnifiers like this one in the middle that can project and read a lot now, or help the person see a lot now. And they're a lot smaller than they used to be and a lot more simplistic to use. I do always like to try these with people or have them meet me at a low vision store or go to the low vision store with a list of things to try, because all of these have different functionalities to them and it's not one fits all users. These are the speech generating devices or communication devices that we assess when we're looking at device options for people. These are the higher tech options. So these are the dedicated devices that are created on a computer that the person has that have a very durable case, usually either have a mount or a durable handle or a way to carry it across the person's body so that they can bring that with them wherever they go. These are ones that are the more expensive types of options, but they work really well for people who need something really durable. If the person needs to use eye gaze, if it's going to be mounted to the chair, if they have a lot of language that we're putting into the device, if they have a lot of accommodations and switch access needs. So we do use these devices, but we also do use tablets and smaller options when that fits the person's needs. And then for communication devices, we do look at mounts if the person's in a wheelchair or if they're not able to carry the device themselves. There's everything from a floor mount to a wheelchair mount to a bed mount. And to different carrying cases and strapping if the person's going to carry it across their body that we're going to be looking at. When we're looking at devices for the person, if like I said, a speech therapist is doing the assessment, then the speech therapist will assess all different types of devices that meets that person's needs. And then MA, insurance, and Medicare are requiring trials to occur. And depending on what the funding source is, the trial period can be 1 month to 3 months that they expect the trials to occur in. And during that time, you need to try a variety of options. And each option usually lets you keep the device for a month to 3 months, depending on what the insurance company is requiring. And during that time, a speech therapist does need to be involved to help capture the data. And then once that data is captured, once that information is formulated and the best device is selected, then that speech therapist would be writing up a full assessment to MA or insurance that the vendor that they select to go with gives them. And it's a quite lengthy report. It takes anywhere from 2 to 5 hours to write that up and to get that submitted to get payment for the device. If mounts are needed or extra switches, those can be considered as part of payment if it's done at the time of the device. If an occupational therapist or that speech therapist writes all of the things that they tried and why that mount, why those switches are needed to go with that device. For mounts, most insurances will allow for 2 different types of mounts for a communication device that will get paid for at the time of purchase by MA or insurance, but some will only allow 1. And we can always let you know what the case is, or a clinic or school, if they're doing this, would let you know. But they oftentimes will allow for a floor mount, and then they'll allow for a mount to be on the bed or on the chair, like that too, because they know that people are moving around and that they will need 2 different types of mounts. They're not going to pay for 2 floor mounts though. If a person needs 2 floor mounts, then 1 would get paid for by MA, and 1 then would have to go looking at waiver funding or some other funding for the payment. There are some really unique mounts that are out there right now too. And I did bring mounts and stuff that I have here, but I'm just not sure on my camera I'm going to be able to show everything. But I'm going to try to grab a couple simple ones. But this mount is a very complicated mouse that does a lot of different things for someone. It's usually used for gaming, but it can be used for computer access, and it could be used for communication access too if the person needs to be really fast at doing it. This mount it allows the person to use sip and puff. It allows them to use their chin. It has like a button for them to push forward and back with their chin. And it allows the person to use a joystick control like this with just having their mouth on the device and moving it around. And so the nice thing about that is, as the person that's using this, the OT or the engineer that's helping them program this and getting it set up for them, we have a lot of different things with one device the person can do, so they can move through things really quickly rather than just one switch that can do one thing at a time. So like this switch, this is a big red switch. This one plugs in. They have wireless ones too. These can only obviously do one thing at a time. It's just gonna go one, then next, then next. Whereas this unique mouse, the quad stick, can do multiple things because it has multiple switch access points in one device. There's another switch that is a wireless switch that has 2 different switches that you can do 2 different things. Switches are used for controlling oftentimes a communication device. So if someone can't direct select by touching the computer or the device themselves, you can add these switches, which can be easier for someone because it takes like a larger muscle motion, and it can be done not just with your hand. You can do it with your face, you can do it with your shoulder. You can use a switch with any body part that's able to do it. You just place it there and mount it there. The switches then can control things that are electronic, like a communication device, your computer, smart home technology. So we're often adding the right switch for the right need of the person, which is all based on what the physical abilities of the person are. There also are proximity switches, and I'm just going to show you a little one, but they come in all shapes and sizes. This one is called the candy corn switch, and this one you just get close to it and it senses that you're activating it. So the person doesn't have to touch it physically, and it makes a beeping noise and gives them auditory and visual feedback because it lights up so that they know that they activated something. So that's just some examples. There are over 2,500 switches, and there's more and more all the time. And so when I don't have switches to bring to try, I do leverage manufacturers to be able to borrow things to be able to try during an assessment. Environmental controls or smart home technology to do things like lights, heat, air conditioning, door openers, ring doorbells. These are all things that we can do in assistive technology. And I don't just mean me, like any of the assistive technology professionals. And often more and more, we're trying to use off-the-shelf technology because it's simpler, it's cheaper, and oftentimes people are already familiar with it, might already have some of it in their home, or their family member might be familiar with it. We tend to go more towards Alexa products in my company just because Alexa does have a hub built into their larger product, and I can use that hub to connect to a variety of things that I can't do in Google as easily. So we do kind of gravitate towards that, but we will use Google if that person, it really is a better fit for them, or they really already have some Google Home products, or that is the brand that they're more into, as long as it meets the needs. And with Alexa, then the person can still touch their device to be able to operate things with Alexa. So if the Alexa app is on their phone or on a tablet or on their computer, they can activate things just through a switch or through touching their device. But oftentimes people with significant needs, like somebody with a high level spinal cord injury, are going to want to or need to do it with their voice. And so then we're going to have the technology set up so that they can do it that way. So what we do is look at what that person needs and the easiest, for them to use, and then set it up that way. And we would be able to tell you in the assessment why we're going the direction we are. And then this is a good example of where least costly isn't going to always be the best. So when we're looking at the different plugs that can be used in a person's home, there are Wi-Fi plugs. And if you put a lot of Wi-Fi plugs into someone's home, let's say they have several lights that they need to be able to control and they're all plugged into the wall. Yeah, you can add Wi-Fi plugs and they're cheaper. But what's going to happen when the Wi-Fi goes down is that they're not going to all reconnect, and many of them are not going to reconnect by themselves. And that's going to get really frustrating for the person. It's also going to get really expensive if they need help to get them reset up again. So there are different communication protocols that are out there that communicate more effectively with Alexa products and Google Home. I don't expect you to understand the terminology, but those communication tools are available in smart plugs, such like Zigbee ones or Z-Wave ones, and they stay connected and they reconnect better when the internet goes down. And when they don't, they're easier to explain to the family remotely how to reconnect them. So even though those plugs cost more, in the end, they're going to save money because you're not going to have a professional going out there so frequently to get things reconnected all the time. So that's a really good example of something where I can tell you why we're paying more for that, but it's going to save money in the long run. Environmental control devices, if I'm going to not just use off-the-shelf technology, we can use a communication device if somebody already has one and they're using it for communication and it's not going to confuse them to move out of their communication page. We can put environmental controls into those communication devices, and then we'd be adding smart plugs and light bulbs and things like that. But the device that they're using to communicate would be what's operating those tools. We can also look at more low-tech options. So if that person doesn't need a lot of fancy things, if it's just on and off types of things, then there are solutions that are switch accessible that the person scans through, and then we can set that up for them instead. And then there are more what we call hospital grade systems that actually do cost a lot of money, but if the person doesn't have a lot of good Wi-Fi or connectability and stuff like that, this might be the only option. And then that would be considered, but we wouldn't consider that if we can pivot off of or use low-tech technology because that's less expensive. Mobility equipment. So this is another area that many of these things are considered durable medical equipment if there is a physical therapist or an occupational therapist involved in the assessment. So power wheelchairs, even manual wheelchairs, scooters, most walkers, those would be things that if they did have a PT or an OT assessment and they have a vendor involved in trials and we have a doctor's order for the equipment and there is an assessed need, that those could be considered durable medical equipment and be paid for by insurance or medical assistance. Rehab shower chairs, bath lifts that are durable medical, like this one, that are provided by like a Reliable Medical, a Handy Medical, like any of the medical device companies are bringing these out with an OT or PT or trying them in a clinic. Those also would be considered durable medical and could be paid for through the waiver, or not the waiver, through MA and insurance, and not the waiver, if an OT or PT are assessing the needs of vendors involved in a doctor's order is secured. And then oftentimes for durable medical equipment, it also requires a face-to-face with the physician in addition to the doctor's order. The lift cart, this is one option that is a waiver paid for item. So if people are having trouble in emergencies getting in and out of like a stair area, and you need a solution that is easier for the person, but it's not going to be every day, then the person can't use a lift, like one of the lifts where they sit on it themselves. A lift cart can be something that also could be taken to someone's home that has stairs, but that person needs to visit there or be there for a period of time. A lift cart adds, it's manual and that the person transfers into it and another person has to hold on to it, but it's motorized and helps the activity of going up and down the stairs be done in an easier way. So this could be considered for those things. This is not durable medical equipment, but I just put it here because it is a mobility solution to get up and down in an emergency or for going to someone's house that has stairs. Sensory equipment, and what's really important about sensory equipment is that not all children and not all adults with sensory needs are the same. And so it's really important to have a good sensory assessment completed by an OT, either in a clinic or a school or somewhere that can really assess what is alerting the person, what's calming to the person, you know, kind of what the person needs throughout the day to keep their level system. Like people that don't have sensory needs are more level throughout the day. We have spikes, we have up and downs like everyone, especially if we have a lot of caffeine in the morning and things like that. But kids and adults that have sensory needs will see these spikes because their body needs something and it needs it to be performed, or you're going to see behaviors, or you're going to see agitation, or you're going to see frustration. That's that person's body's way of telling them and us that they need this. And so that's where these sensory solutions become assistive technology, because they are related directly to the person's needs. They help stabilize the body and they help the person to be able to function in their life. It can be indoor spaces with swings and mats and sensory tools. It can be adding sensory swing to outdoor equipment that's there, and it can be creating calming space. And so it's really important to also, when you're looking at spaces with people, to really understand like what should be the calming space, what should be the alerting space, what should be safe about it, and then getting the right construction people to add swings if they're going to be added in the home so they're secure to the ceiling. These are all waiver possible items, but it's just really important to, if the person's already had these before, or they've already been assessed, or they've already tried them, and they do have a sensory assessment to back the needs of that they wouldn't need another assessment or anything, but it's just important to understand that piece and to make sure that the equipment being selected is correct. And then when I work with families as an OT, I want to make sure that they understand that calming spaces and alerting spaces, it's really important where we put them. Sometimes families get caught up in where the space is, But I wouldn't want alerting space to be in the bedroom, because that teaches that person, whether they're adult or a child, that that's where I activate, that's where I get my energy out, and that's not where I sleep. And so we want to be really careful about considering all of those things in the factors also. Safety equipment. So we and all the AT providers do a lot of safety assessments for kids and adults who have urges to elope or to leave the home, and it might not be safe for them to do that alone. And so these can be anything from door alerts and window alerts to notify someone that someone did open a door, open a window. Could be cameras for us to be able to see who did that so that we know and what direction they went. And it also can be wearables for us to be able to see where the person is and make sure that they're staying in safe zones, or be able to contact them and have them stay there so you can help them if they're not in a safe zone. My company, we do alerting devices and safety equipment, but it all goes back to the person to alert them, or to their family, or to a caregiver. We don't do anything that goes to an outside entity, but there are companies that will talk about that do that. But we do everything that helps that person or helps their caregiver, family, or team. For medical funding, when someone can go to a clinic and that does meet their need and they can get there, doctors do order that clinic-based assessment. Oftentimes, clinics can start the assessment and then get the doctor's order. They just start gathering the assessment information, but they are working under a doctor's order, and they're working under insurance and MA or Medicare. And then there is home care, but there is less and less of home care models just available anyway, and less of them that know AT. But that is an option, especially if it's durable medical equipment and someone had a hospital stay. There are more Medicare related home care agencies that are there for when someone had a hospital stay to help them get their durable medical equipment set up. These medical funding can be speech, OT, and PT. And if that meets the needs, then they can do assistive technology there if it's not specific to the home. So like communication devices and mobility devices, and even shower chairs and things like that can be done in a clinic if a person can get there. And then all of that's billable, that service is billable. So safety beds, hospital beds, those are also things that at times can be done from a clinic, and they don't have to be done in home. Waiver funding is for the social model services. So those are the services that are being billed to waiver. I have not seen any clinics yet understand how to bill waiver or doing that. So waiver billable is the companies you see here and companies that are going into the home. They utilize assistive technology professionals, therapists, Minnesota accessibility specialists, or someone who's certified in assistive technology. And then these services that are waiver funded, they might occur in a school, like for schools might be asking for waiver funding for equipment. They might be done in a home like from all of us, or in a community. And like for me, I can go into a clinic setting if I need to help a MA billable therapist to be able to do a couple things, since I'm billing waiver and we're not billing the same entity. If they don't know something that they need to learn and we're helping the same person, I can go there to help show them at the same time I'm helping the person because I have that specialty. Waiver funding is also for assistive technology equipment that's not durable medical equipment will get funded through waiver. And then anything that gets denied by MA. There are a lot of things that MA does not pay for that's related to assistive technology. So their focus is durable medical equipment, and where it's not considered that, they won't give you a denial. They just don't pay for assistive technology. There is one item that I got a lot of questions about at the last meeting that I'm just going to say because it'll probably come up again today, is that weighted blankets MA does say that they will pay for weighted blankets, but their price point is so low, it doesn't cover a weighted blanket at all. And so there is no vendor in Minnesota that will honor that or take MA funding for a weighted blanket. And MA reviewers do know that. I have let them know that now. So they're looking at that. But you won't get an MA denial, but you won't be able to order a weighted blanket unless the waiver pays for it. And so the waiver has been allowed to pay for it when I let them know that. And then I'm hoping MA reviews it and either takes it off their list or they pay for it in full so that we have an answer on that one now that I let them know about that. When there is no other funding, this would be funding of last resort because there isn't anything else, then I can help, people or anyone they can do GoFundMe, fundraising events. There's the ARRM micro grant, and there's community organizations like the Lions Club, Rotary Club, VFWs, churches. So those are what we would help someone to go towards. And I think I'm out of time. I do have more AT here right by me, but I think I'm out of time.
Presentation today with the 3 hours.
Yep.
But that was like great information that you covered, and thank you so much for covering it.
Yes, you're welcome.
Yeah, no problem. So right now I'm just going to give everybody a quick break. So I'm going to give 5 minutes. So if you guys can return back at 3:15, and then we're going to get into remote support, alternative overnight supervision with technology, and transitions technology, as well as how to have the conversation. So return back at 3:15 and we'll see you in a little bit. So hope you enjoyed the quicker break that time. So our next presenter is going to be Kit Piltingsrud to talk about transitioning and technology and transition aged tech. So Kit, I will hand it over to you.
Thanks, Elena. As I said before in my introduction, was a special education teacher for the developmentally disabled at the high school and transition aids level. And when I fell out of love with public education and started working in group homes with developmentally disabled adults, all the technology that I had worked so hard to get into the hands of the students was suddenly gone, and I had no idea where it had ended up. And that's what prompted me to get my assistive technology professional certification. And then, you know, of course, 2020 hindsight, being able to look back at where some of the barriers are when it comes to transition, is that we have teachers are already super busy. I know that I hadn't thought about making sure that families and support people were trained on the technology that I was teaching people to use, but it hadn't dawned on me. But I also, even if it had, I wouldn't have had the time to put into making sure that families were trained on how to use the technology. And then not only that, but a lot of times the schools own the technology. So then when they move on to their next steps, the school actually keeps the technology. So ensuring that there is technology in multiple settings so that students can be using it at home and at school, and then follow through with that through all of the different transitions that happen right at the end of school. So I know that we go from school age case management to transition age case management to adult case management, all in a very short period of time. And we find ourselves in a situation where a lot of odds and ends get left behind. And a lot of times the first thing is assistive technologies. So that's basically what I'm here, is to get up on my little soapbox and be able to explain to you guys that this is a really important step. We have people, I've had people that have been super successful in the school system, and then once they became adults, the technology was gone, and to no fault of really anybody other than it just slipped through the cracks. So making sure that when we're having those meetings that transition somebody from one setting to another setting, to make sure that that technology is being addressed, making sure that support systems are all being taught on how to use it. And for you all as case managers, helping make sure that those things happen, that the families have that technology as the same technology that is being used in the school, making sure that families or caregivers are given the opportunity for training for that technology is also super important. So working with some of the providers that are here today so that they can help ensure that those transitions move much more smoothly. And a lot of that starts with that conversation that Anna Hagelin will be talking to you a little bit later. Is there anything else that I should be talking on?
Open it up for questions to people for both Sue and Kit now. Have you guys had any questions or thoughts coming off of those two presentations? All right. I'll just add, one of the things that we usually get kind of a response when Kit talks about transition technology is really kind of that surprise when she mentions, like, you know, as an educator, when she was doing that, the last thought was, oh, I need to train the families. I need to do this on that technology we're using, because that's not the educator's job. They're working with the student and they're getting the student comfortable with it. And a lot of case managers kind of, we see that like, oh, yeah, that does make sense now that you say it. So I like to reiterate some points throughout the training. And that's a good one, is like, engage in a conversation with the staff that's working with the student in the school. If you have that opportunity, learn what they're doing. And then if you can, act as that communicator between them and the families, or encourage the families to ask the educators questions about that technology. That's really, really crucial to do exactly what Kit highlighted in trying to keep the appropriate technologies in place for the individual.
Yes.
And then the only other thing we see is that we don't want to think about what that child or person in the school needs as they graduate or right after they graduated. When I get in there, MA does want to pay for devices for communication.
Yes.
They don't expect the school to fund that device and it only be at school. And so even if it's a child, if they're starting communication devices, it's really important to have that whole view, and they can have a device of their own. It doesn't have to be a school-owned device. And in middle school, really any technology that person's using in all places should be considered either by waiver or MA, whatever the funding source is, before that child graduates, well before. So they know how to use it, they have it, and they can succeed to the next step. Otherwise, a lot of times I'm seeing people in a panic mode, and sometimes it's 6 months after they had no technology because no one could figure out what they should have done. And so we don't want that to happen.
Exactly. What she said.
Yeah. So I guess what we obviously throughout all of this, and especially with this transitions, because so much gets lost, unfortunately, over communicate, right? Ask questions, engage in conversations with every single person who is in that individual's life if you can, because the more that you can learn earlier, the easier it is for everybody in the long run, and the better outcomes for the individual served. So any thoughts or questions? I thought maybe we could get some in there while we were chatting. But if not, then we will transition, right? Over to discussing remote supports and AOST. So
I'm gonna say goodbye. So if anybody has questions for me, I will answer them through an email or something.
Yeah, and I'm gonna stay on for a little while longer, but I have to leave right at 4.
Okay, perfect.
Thanks.
Thank you. And thank you, Kit, for joining us. We appreciate it.
Yep. Bye.
Yes, bye-bye. So I will hand it over then to Kathy Larson.
Hi, everybody. So I'm going to be talking a little about use of technology supports and remote supports, monitoring technology, more from a CRS group home perspective and how we use that type of technology with the individuals that we're working with. So first off, we all know that and Anna talked about earlier, that at the 45-day and annual meeting, we have to have a discussion in regards to technology. And that's something new for some of us that are trying to have that discussion on technology and don't have a lot of experience in it. So we are working with all of the group homes out there to look at those opportunities that come up in those conversations with the teams about where we can use technology. And I'm going to talk about some of the ways that we can try to use it. So the first way that we are often looking at trying to find where we can use technology is with overnight supervision. So using what we call alternative overnight supervision technology, we are able to get a special license right now to allow us to use technology to support group homes on the overnight. So that again, it's called an AOST license that we do have to apply for and receive in order to use technology to support us on the overnight. But it is called the Alternative Overnight Supervision Technology License, or AOST license. It is a requirement right now, although I'll tell you legislatively, there's been a lot of work put in to eliminate the AOST license need. So right now, even though group homes are required to have that license in order to use technology to support overnight, we expect that that may not continue much longer. It's expected that it will be passed and would start in January, where that's no longer needed in order to provide technology. So in the future, going forward, what we would do is we'd come to a team meeting, we'd have a discussion. Does this individual going to need, sleep overnight staff, awake overnight staff, or are we comfortable with technology overnight staff? So we look for those opportunities where individuals at all different levels can potentially use some type of technology to support them on the overnight. And this could be a combination of sensors, motion detectors, two-way audio video devices, two-way audio devices, personal pagers. All these types of devices are used in combination to alert either a staff person or a caregiver that there's a particular need. In some situations, there may be an awake staff in a local area that would be called in if somebody has a particular need. Or in some cases, we have homes that have an on-call person who is called, and we may have a remote support company that's providing our first line of intervention, talking to the person, finding out what the needs are before they would call the on-call staff person in. So there's all kinds of different ways to set up alternative overnight supervision tech on the overnight. And that's one of the opportunities we want to start to talk about and look at to help with particularly the staffing crisis, but also to help with increasing levels of independence for the people that we're working with so that we're not over-serving them, that we are providing the level of care that most meets their need. So that's one opportunity we're looking for. The other opportunity that we're often looking for when we are coming to these conversations is, can we use technology to support an individual during the day? We do not need a special license or anything in order to do technology supervision during the day. So we can put in tech support during the daytime without having to go through a special licensing process. And with that, we might have, maybe an individual who comes home after work early, doesn't really have any needs between 3 o'clock and maybe supper time. And so they're able to have technology supporting them during that time frame. Or maybe it's all their other roommates go out to work during the day, but they're home during the day, but they really don't have any needs that come up. They pretty much can serve all of their needs. So we may have technology supports there to support them during the day. In those instances, sometimes, we can have individuals that stay home alone for a certain amount of alone time, but sometimes there's people that we want to have some type of connect or some type of way to call out if they have a particular need, and we might use technology for that. So in those cases, we call it alone time with the use of technology, and or of course there's supervised staff in the home needs. So one of those three things might be what we decide to do. So you do alone time with technology, or you use or they're supervised during that time period that they're home. So we're looking for, again, opportunities to use technology during the day, which also can help tremendously with the staffing crisis that we've been going through here over the last few years. So there's two opportunities that we're looking for. The other one we're looking for often is, can we go from maybe 2 staff that are there on the overnight to 1 staff? So there may be needs that 2 staff had to take care of, where we can have 1 staff take care of that if we have technology to help support that house as well. This could be everything from safety and security issues, having individuals that might elope from the home and you want to have an extra staff person there, or even having physical needs that if we had a device that could help with that physical need, we wouldn't necessarily need 2 staff on. So we're looking for the opportunity to go from 2 staff to 1 staff. Could be on the overnight or it could be during the day. One of the other opportunities we look for is, can we go from an awake overnight staff to a sleep staff if we had technology support to wake up and ensure that the staff are able to attend to the needs of the individual on the overnight. So there might be, maybe somebody has an awake staff because they might wake up and go into the kitchen and raid the refrigerator, or they need to have an awake staff because they could get up and walk out the door. So is there any technology that we could put into place that could help with some of that monitoring through either motion detectors, door sensors, pager alerts? What is it that we could put into place in the house that will wake up the staff person and let the staff know that, so-and-so is moving around the house and you need to go check and see what's going on. So those are great opportunities for us to move from an awake staff to a sleep staff. And that's been very helpful, especially in circumstances where we've had staff having to work double shifts because there's just not enough staff to work, or we have managers who are having to work all during the day and then they're there during the night as well because they don't have a night staff on. So they've got to, get some rest somehow. So this is a way to make sure that the staff are there when they really have to be there, but not putting an awake staff in place for the just in cases situations. Oftentimes technology can help us do those things and actually can be better than sometimes even having a staff person there, because it allows us to know exactly when the individual in the room has a particular need, whereas a staff would only know that if they were going in, opening up the door and checking. So that's the other one we do. And then the last one I want to talk about is technology that we might use or want to put into place to help an individual be able to do more for themselves. So we might be asking for, in some cases, a remote support, a assistive technology evaluation by an assistive tech professional, such as Sue or Matt or anybody, to be able to come out and do an evaluation with the individuals to try to find ways that we can help the individual be able to be more independent and do more things on their own. We've had many situations where we brought in and have done an ATP evaluation, and we've been able to help the person do more on their own to where they no longer require staff having to come in and turn on their lights for them, open up their shades, be able to turn on their television, turn the channels on their television. So it's been very helpful to increase independence for the individuals to be able to do more for themselves. Of course, that's our goal for all the individuals. We want them to be able to do as much for themselves as possible and to increase their independence as much as possible. And this is one way to do that through these evaluations. We did have another situation where we did have an ATP evaluation, and what we found is that the individual was able to implement some of these devices. They actually had a significant decrease in their challenging behaviors. So because they had more control over their life, more control of the things that they were doing, there was less power struggles and arguments with staff. We saw a significant decrease in the unwanted and challenging behaviors that they had. So these are some opportunities. We don't always need an ATP evaluation to implement some of the different assistive tech devices, but in complicated situations, it's been very helpful for us to have somebody come in, because not only do they come in and give us a recommendation on the devices to use, they can order those devices and then bring them back and train our staff and train the individual on how to use those devices, because we want to make sure that we're maintaining them and keep using them and keep training the individual on the use of them. So we'll continue to do that, and that's where the ATP evaluations can be really helpful. So I think that was all that I was going to go through. I think we were going to pass on to Anna Hegland to talk about the rest of the remote support and assistive tech piece, or AOST piece.
One of the things that, Kathy talked about how this can help staff, right? And that there's benefit from it. So I just want to reiterate what Anna McIntyre said at the beginning, which is exactly what we liked to highlight, is that DHS has really changed that tune on it is okay for technology to also benefit staff. Because like Kathy highlighted, a lot of times when you're benefiting staff, you're directly benefiting the individual and they're getting increased independence with that. So keep that in mind if you have a provider who's approaching you and asking you for alternative overnight supervision with technology or daytime remote support, or when AOST goes away, hopefully just remote support in general. Keep that in mind so that you don't unintentionally create barriers or have to go put yourself through additional work too in trying to track down and make sure that that's okay. Like you did hear it from Anna McIntyre today, that it is approved and it is okay to approve that service and technology. And Anna, wait, hold on, I need to spotlight you. She's giving her thumbs up. And then the last thing that I just wanted to very, very quick mention about alternative overnight supervision and remote support, just to keep in mind kind of with the technology itself, it's unique, right? Like when we're talking about assistive technology, generally speaking, you're thinking of something that like you get your hands on, right? This is a low tech nail clipper that I can just push or hit with my elbow or something like that. The individual's kind of engaging with it. They're getting their hands on it. They're using it, or they're verbally interacting with it or using their eyes to interact with it, but they're interacting with it. remote support is unique in that it's really not something that they're necessarily choosing to or like going to interact with. It's a passive system is what we kind of call it, because it's typically things like sensors, motion detectors. Sometimes you do see cameras, right, when appropriate, but even a lot of times for remote support, cameras are used maybe to look at doors, like external doors, because there's elopement concerns or concerns about an individual not being able to differentiate between friend or foe when somebody comes to visit them. So you put cameras on the doors, but the idea is that it's still benefiting the individual because they don't have to have a person is staffing them and looking over them. So even though they're not directly getting their hands on it and they're not directly using it, they're absolutely use it through their passive behaviors, being able to send out an alert, a remote monitoring team or their caregiving staff, if they're using enabling technology to respond, to know and understand how to support them remotely. So I just like to stress that because it is kind of a little unique compared to what you would normally think of with assistive technology, but it's still absolutely provable. And as Anna mentioned, it's enabling technology is billed under EAA for the way that that's covered. Unless it's something that stays in the home, then the provider pays for it. So if you think about the tablet portion of what they're going to be using for remote support, if that goes with them, if they're using a cell phone or things like that, then it's paid for through their waiver. Kathy, did you have anything to add to that?
No, are there any questions about remote support? All right, then not, we'll move on. Let Anna take over.
Well, thank you. And Anna actually did post a question that I missed right before I'd handed it off to Kathy. But if any of you are currently supporting people who use remote support, that can be overnight, that can be daytime support, please respond in the chat. This is a question we ask because really, truly coming back to what Anna McIntyre said, they've changed the way that we're looking at this. They put a modifier to be able to track this, but previously it was tracked differently. And so it's harder for us to see how many people were truly and uniquely using remote support. So if you do, or you're supporting somebody who has it, please respond in the chat. And it looks like you had something, Anna McIntyre, sorry.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say, or they could just raise their hand too.
Yeah, oh, that would work too.
That might be easier.
Yeah, use the little icons. I always forget those exist. They're really cool. I need to use them more. All right. Well, I mean, and that's actually really telling. And I'll let you talk about that, but Anna, take it away.
Sounds good. Thanks, everybody. I will try to make it quick so we can get you out of here on time today. When we talk about having the conversation around technology, most of my experience comes from the CRS side. So like Kathy, supporting people remotely who are in a CRS. We had the first licensed home in the state, so about 14 years ago, and that was actually supporting people with really complicated medical needs. Oftentimes when we talk about remote support, I think a lot of people think about what was put into place throughout COVID for people who are maybe more independent and receiving unit-based services, things like that. But this has been available for a long time and has been a great option for service delivery, even for people who do need a high level of in-person support. One of the barriers that often comes up when trying to implement remote support is just the lack of knowledge and awareness around what it is, how it works, and how you can apply it to the person that you support. So we often say when you're having the conversation, right, you look at the needs first and then you look for technology second, right? But realistically in CRS, there are also times where we're just saying, hey, how do you guys feel about remote support, right? And then we start talking about the needs, right? Because we need to actually start the conversation about technology. So oftentimes when we say, hey, what do you think about this to a team? Sometimes we get a, yeah, absolutely not. And other times we get, more inquisitive, well, tell me what you mean by that. But I think what's most